Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello. My name is Jenna. I'm the Learning and Engagement Lead here at BIMA. We would like to begin with the words of Chief Seattle. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Let us now acknowledge that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish, people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So Erin Zona is an artist and curator with 2 decades of experience in artist book publishing, education, archival work, and nonprofit leadership. She's the new curator of the Cynthia Sears Artist Book Collection, and Aimee Lee's Tethered is her first exhibition here at BIMA. From 2017 to 2024, Zona served as co-executive director of Women's Studio Workshop in upstate New York. And as director of WSW's publishing imprint, she oversaw the production of more than 27 new artist book titles and represented over 200 artists from the organization's publishing history, placing artist books in hundreds of collections across the United States. Please welcome our new book arts curator, Erin Zona, who will introduce Aimee Lee.
Hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to empty my pockets. So thank you all for being here today. It is I feel honored to be here standing on this stage and to be welcoming Aimee here for the first time, but also for the first time for me being here. And I want to thank all of you for your time today. And Jenna as well for the warm introduction. I do want to say just a few thank yous in general about this exhibition before I go into introducing Aimee, because this is such a special moment in particular for the collection as we're looking forward. And so I want to thank Cynthia Sears, of course, for her generosity and dedication. And this dedication is not only to the artist's book as an object and an art form, but also to the artists and their stories, and her work and the work of this museum make that possible. I'd also like to thank Catherine Alice Michaels, the previous curator of the Cynthia Sears collection, for doing the work to initiate this exhibition. This was planned before I had stepped into this role, and so she got things started. It was my first time installing in the space, and so if you ever see me around the museum, please, say hi to me, and I'm happy to talk to you about the shows, any of them. I worked with Babette Mayer on installing the show, which was really fun. Thank you for your time in that. And I do want to, cheers. And many other people on the curatorial team who helped, put this show together. So there is a really fabulous catalog for this exhibition that I have to just do a little bit of mention for. We have copies that you can see on the way out. Everyone who worked on the catalog here at BIMA and Aimee, Laura Zander, who is BIMA's graphic designer, did really beautiful work in making sure that the actual handmade paper is represented in the catalog as well. Vicki Stewart, a longtime advocate who's not here today, a longtime advocate for the artist book, wrote a really lovely introduction to the catalog. And the catalog also includes an interview between Aimee and Mina Takahashi, who is the editor of Hand Papermaking, which is a print publication dedicated to advancing traditional and contemporary ideas in the art of making paper by hand. So we had the idea that instead of having an essay, for Mina to write an essay, to actually have Mina and Aimee engage in a conversation, and then we edit that into a piece of writing. And so Mina very graciously offered to edit the document, which when it landed in my inbox was transcribed at about 40 pages. And Mina got it down to the perfect 7 spreads that we have in the catalog. I'd also like to thank the many individuals who provided quotes that you can see throughout the catalog that are about Aimee as a teacher, researcher, and an artist. So it is with great pride that we today have Aimee Lee on the island for her event and to present her solo exhibition Tethered, which is on view in the second floor of the museum in the Sherry Grover Gallery. This exhibition, as well as all the other exhibitions at BIMA in 2026, are presented in collaboration with Craft in America's Handwork 2026. This is a nationwide initiative devoted to celebrating artists and craft-rooted processes that shape meaning, memory, and connection in the 21st century. BIMA is one of over 250 organizations nationwide to have joined the initiative to showcase the depth and diversity of craft in America. Aimee Lee is one of the most highly collected artists in the Cynthia Sears Artist Book Collection at BIMA. Her scholarship, creative output, and teaching occupy vital space in the historical record, preservation, and expansion of Korean handmade paper known as Hanji. In this exhibition, you will encounter a significant selection of unique limited edition artist books from the collection, alongside selected loaned works from the artist that work together to illuminate her expansive artistic range. Aimee Lee is an artist who makes paper, writes, and advocates for Korean papermaking practices. She received her bachelor degree from Oberlin College and an MFA from Columbia College, Chicago. She is collected and exhibited internationally, and her work has been shown at many places, many of which I will name, including the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Fuller Craft Museum, the Islip Art Museum, Museum of Nebraska Art, the Allen Memorial Art Museum, the Korean Consulate in New York City, and the Korean Cultural Centers of the Korean Embassy in Washington, D.C. and Abu Dhabi. In addition to BIMA, other collections that hold her work include the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, Harvard, Stanford, UCLA, and Yale. Aimee Lee travels the world to teach. She is an inaugural Midwest Culture Bearer awardee and serves her regional community as an Ohio Arts Council Heritage Fellow, teaching papermaking and book arts at Oberlin College during their winter term. Funders include the U.S. Fulbright Program, Korea Fulbright Foundation, the John Anson Kitteridge Fund, American Folklore Society, Arts Midwest, Assembly for the Arts, Center for Craft, Oak Spring Garden Foundation, Puffin Foundation, and Spaces. Aimee is a two-time Fulbright Scholar to South Korea. Her initial Fulbright research helped her in the establishment of the first Hanji studio in North America and in writing her award-winning book, Hanji Unfurled. This book brought critical attention to Korean papermaking histories and methodologies. Her second Fulbright Award as a senior scholar focused on advanced research in traditional Korean papermaking tools, further extending her long-term engagement in material knowledge and craft lineages. Aimee Lee trains the next generation of papermakers in the Korean tradition from the Korean diaspora and beyond in her private Hanji studio east of Cleveland and in workshops around the world. So before we welcome Aimee, I just want to say, I really intentionally, a lot of times I think you hear people say, I won't read the whole thing, I won't read all of the places. But I think that it is a real point of honor that all of us are here in this room right now with Aimee, who is someone who has really dedicated decades of her time as an artist and researcher to this work. And I just really wanted to give space to what that means to her. So to not cut any of those things, even though it is a list, right? It's a very important and wonderful list. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Aimee. I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here at BIMA. I'm so grateful that this is the site of my first solo museum exhibit, especially knowing that this is a museum that really celebrates its local and regional artists. So I'm very, very honored that you opened your home to me, coming from far away. Though I have to say that being here for the last couple of days, I have not felt this kind of hospitality since I was in Tasmania several years ago teaching, and I thought, I don't know, maybe it's an island thing, you know? But I'm very, very grateful to Cynthia Sears, to Erin, to Catherine, to everyone here at the museum and in the community taking care of me. I'm gonna start with this image. The people getting married are my great aunt, Lee Hee-ho, and Kim Dae-jung. And the person next to her is her eldest brother, Lee Kang-ho, who was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. And at the time, his younger sister's getting married to who they think is kind of maybe not the greatest match. Like, he's this political guy, and she's not going to be rich, and this is not ideal. He eventually, in the late 90s, became the president of South Korea. But, I mean, it was very hard. There was definitely, like, lots of jail time, there was attempted assassination. She was under house arrest. It was very bad for them for a very long time. But the reason I point this out is that I feel like my grandfather, he was the president of one of the first stock companies in Korea, and he was forced to leave his position because of this marriage, because my great uncle was part of the opposition or the resistance, and so the people in power tried to suppress everyone in our family, and so he wasn't able to hold on to his position or all of his wealth. But he was actually an amateur photographer, and he built a whole darkroom in his basement, and this is an image that he took of my father and myself and my younger sister in New York. And we were both born in New York City, and my parents met each other in New York. They didn't meet each other in Korea. And my grandfather also took a lot of time in going to their name maker in Korea. When a baby is born, you don't name them right away. You have to wait, or you don't come up with a name before they're born. You have to wait until they're born, because you have to know exactly where and when they're born. And so once I was born, my parents sent my grandfather the information, and then he went to the name maker who made my name, and which is not Aimee. That was my parents did choose that, and I'm grateful for that, because it was a time where it was not easy to have a foreign name growing up in the U.S. But this is my Korean name, Lee Sang-yeon, and this is my fortune. And the other thing that my grandfather was very traditional, Neo-Confucian, but also a kind of a polyglot, and he spoke 6 different languages. And so he wrote this letter to me, and I would have received it when I was about 10 years old, and I wanted to pull out this one quote that really explains this Neo-Confucianism that still affects me to this day, where I'm expected to faithfully obey my parents and my teachers, and to grow up to be a nice and brilliant girl, which I don't know how useful that was. It's a lot of pressure. I'm firstborn, and I think I've done all that, but at what cost, right? So the other influences of me at home, I grew up along the Hudson River in New York, and I feel like there was something about that river in particular is not even just a river, it's an estuary, and so it actually means it flows at some times in both directions at once. So it'll be flowing both north and south, and then eventually empty into the ocean. And so when I went to school at Oberlin, I felt very landlocked suddenly, and I didn't understand, what is the difference between Ohio and New York? And I think that had a lot to do when I went to Chicago and started making paper in grad school, with this affinity I felt immediately with the hand paper making process, which is so watery. I also, before I went to Oberlin, the reason I went there is because I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a concert violinist, and then I arrived and realized I was really not that great, and switched into an art major, though I kept playing the whole time, to the point where all my conservatory friends thought I was in the conservatory. But again, I'm not that good compared to professionals, but I was able to find a graduate program that embraced, it was an interdisciplinary program, and they were very welcoming of the idea of me trying to combine performance and, at the time, book arts, because I had started making artist books at the end of Oberlin, and I just fell in love with that medium, because I could express in so many different ways stories, essentially. And but then once I started making paper, which was the first course I took at Columbia College, I just completely fell in love, and then it kind of veered in the other direction. So performance and paper, and so this was a 3-hour durational performance I did at the Chicago Cultural Center in Preston Bradley Hall, which is a city block wide, and it used to be the circulating room of the public library. And I had this vision of just filling it with stories the way it had been filled with these books that came in and out of the library, but I just thought, how am I supposed to fill a city block with paper? And a mentor said, well, you don't. You fill it with sound. And so this is a performance where I had a whole 14-foot paper train that I was dragging behind me, and that was making noise. And then I had paper that I had made, and I asked people to send me or write to me stories of journeys that they had taken, and then I would stop periodically, read them, and then translate it into sound, because I was doing a lot of improvisation at the time. And so in a way, that dream of being some kind of soloist came true. It just was mediated in this other way. But eventually my MFA thesis was this 14-foot tall brick tower, and all made out of paper bricks. I made over 2,000 to construct this. And it was a self-portrait, and it was meant to talk about the ways that the ridiculousness of walls, really, and that you think that you get hurt, and if you just protect your heart and you build walls around your heart, you will be safe, and how untrue and how damaging that can be. And so I made a wall that is everything that a wall is not supposed to be. So first of all, it's hung from the top down. It can't stand on its own. It has no mortar. You can see through the spaces between the bricks. You can walk by it and it will move. You can enter it because there's a door, and it's not even finished. On the inside, it looks like a honeycomb and not a wall. And I activated it with a performance that night. But when my mother and sister came to visit, my mother said to her, was Aimee thinking about this other structure when she was making this? And my sisters asked me, and I said, no, I wasn't thinking about it at all. And I looked it up, and then I started crying because I realized this is a structure that I had used 7 years prior in one of my artist books assignments for my, it wasn't a final, but it was a very big project. And I was selecting old black and white photos and color photos of my parents. This is a national treasure in Korea. It's the oldest still standing observatory of this time in all of East Asia. And it's one of those things that all Korean people have been to. So I had pictures of my dad in his school uniform and my mom in her school uniform. And I was writing a book. I was making a book about them before they had ever met each other. And then I had pictures of myself and my sister and our family there in the summers. And I realized that that image had somehow lodged and was coming out in this other way. But I didn't understand it until, again, it was kind of brought to the fore. And I started to realize that I wanted to connect with Korea in a way that was no longer only about my family and kind of obligation and this, again, this Neo-Confucian, like, you have to be good. And instead, I wanted to connect with it as an artist. And so the more I learned about papermaking history and how it starts in China and goes to Korea and Japan, and we only really had good information in English on Japanese paper, I decided I had to go to Korea to learn about Hanji, which is Korean paper. And so I got a Fulbright grant and was able to spend over a year there, and it was a lot of escapades, which you can read about in my book, but it was really important for me to try to learn this sheet formation method. And of course, I was very naive going in thinking that's all I needed to learn. And of course, when you go in that way, you realize it's just the very beginning of what you need to learn. And I was very fortunate to find a succession of teachers who would help me do that. So this is just a few of the steps in making Hanji. So before you even make the paper, you have to have formation aid, which is this goo that often comes from hibiscus roots. So these have been planted and cultivated and then grown and pulled out of the ground in the fall, washed, frozen. When you need them, you pull them out, you beat them and soak them in very cold water and let them ooze this mucilage, which is like what comes out of okra. And then you have to strain it a few times, and then if you don't have that, you can't make any paper. So that's one piece of the plant world that you need to deal with. For the actual fiber paper making, you need the paper mulberry tree, which you cut at the end of the growing season. Once all the leaves have fallen one by one, you steam them for several hours so that the outer bark pulls away from the inner woody core, which you do not need, you just use for firewood. And then the stripped bark, you need to scrape by hand to get rid of the outer layers to get to the inner white bark, which is what you need for really high quality paper. And then you can bleach that in the sun, dry it. When you need it, you can soak it, cook it in an alkaline solution. To make the alkaline solution, you have to take another batch of plants, burn them to make potash, and then you can then, all these women have to pick out every little last bit of bark or ash or anything impurity that's left, and then you have to beat it. And here at Changjibang, my teachers had this beater so that they were able to do this a lot faster, but often this is done by hand. Then you can go to the vat and then fill it with water, add the beaten fiber, and then stir it with the bamboo pole for half an hour. And then after you do that, you add the mucilage, stir for another half an hour, and then you can start sheet forming. People also, they often think this is paper making. This is one piece of paper making. So there's a bamboo screen that's pulled through the water, or the slurry, in different directions. And then you have the fibers lining up in layers on the bamboo screen, and there's nothing trapping the screen. There's no upper frame above it. It's very unusual for paper making. You usually see an upper screen, and this is what's very different from Korean paper and other types of paper. And then you have to get that paper that's on the screen off of it so that you can use the screen again and make more paper. So you turn it upside down, you're gonna release the front edge, and then that thread will go down between every other sheet. It's a very technical thing. And then hands go in hot water because this vat is ice cold. It was done usually by farmers in slack season when they were done with the food crops and needed more income. And so the good thing about winter is that's when the trees are ready. That's when the mucilage works, because if it's too warm, the mucilage just turns to water and it reduces bacterial growth, so nothing's rotting. Front to back dip, and then side to side dips. And because of that front to back dip, all the slurry starts in the beginning and distributes its way to the end. So the back of the sheet is slightly thinner than the front of the sheet because there's less fiber. So to counteract that, I'm gonna turn the screen 180 degrees. That happens every other time. So then the sheets they end up one flips, and then they're dried together in two plies. And so that's why you have the thread only between every other, not every sheet. And so most people can't notice each sheet made this way is 2 layers. And then there's a process of pressing it, which I didn't videotape. It's very boring. It takes a long time, and you're just pressing water very slowly. But you can see how much smaller, right, this stack or this post of paper is from the initial one. And then this is when you need the threads, and you're going to take out the top thread to release the front edge of each sheet, and it's still damp, so it will stick to this stick. And then I'm going to pull it away, and you use a stick because you want it to pull away cleanly and evenly, and not kind of uneven. Like if I was just to take my fingers, it would stretch too much in one or the other direction. The steel plate behind me is actually heated by steam, and so it's a forced heat dryer. So I'm going to brush onto the steel surface, and then there's a specific sequence of brush strokes that you use to get this down, and you have to work very quickly. And because this was I filmed this, on a tripod when no one was looking. Because I was training, this is really way too slow. So, but as soon as the first one is down, the second one, then the third one goes down. You can see the steam coming out of the third one. The first one's already dry. You check it to make sure it's not cold, and then you just keep going. And then tochim is the final finishing step where you're just hammering it, and that helps increase surface sheen, reduce ink bleed, and make it a stronger sheet. And this has made this paper very desirable in other parts of East Asia. So these are some of the people that I studied with and was able to meet. And so I happened to pull, just to impress you, all the people who are either national or regional treasures. Unfortunately, Chang Yong-hun, who is in the very top left, he has passed away. But he was the father of my first teacher. This is my second teacher. And then Yubekun, who makes the tools, the screens, he passed away a couple years ago. I went to Chodaeong to learn from him. Even though he doesn't make Hanji screens, you just go to the next closest person. So he made these beautiful screens for a different purpose, and we just tried to collaborate to figure out how to teach me how to do that best. So I had all this information, and I wanted to come back and share it, of course, and I was lucky that at the Morgan Conservatory in Cleveland, they were open to having me build out basically a Hanji studio. And this is very unusual for, initially they said, we want you to teach a 2-day workshop. And then I said, I need a big vat. And they said, okay. And most places don't just say, okay, to a vat this size. But I ended up raising money and they raised money and I spent a summer there. And in 5 weeks, we built out a studio. So that was 2010. A couple years after that, I published my book about my journey through Korea. And then a year after that, I decided to move to Cleveland. I was still living in New York and realized this is the only place outside of Korea that I can make Hanji. Why should I live so far away? So just to get a sense of why Hanji is important in Korea, this is one of the oldest. This is actually, once it was discovered in the 1970s in a Buddhist stupa, they deemed it the oldest still existing woodblock print on paper in the world. Before that, it was a Japanese version, similar kind of thing, devotional sutras that are printed. And this is the reason that Koreans have a proverb that says silk lasts for 500 years, but Hanji lasts for 1,000. This was wrapped, or this was in a roll, and the outer wrapper was silk, and it had been eaten away, but the inner parts, you can see there is damage, obviously, but is still much more intact than the silk was. But these sutras were ways for, especially wealthy patrons, they would commission them and they would ask Buddhist monks to make the paper, to dye the paper. This is actually indigo. It looks black, but it's dyed so intensely and then illuminated with gold. But in this particular sutra, they even talk about the devotion starting all the way from cultivating the trees to make the paper and perfuming them. And so this was probably done manuscript by hand. But once woodblock printing became a thing, book culture just took off in Korea. So books, when you have a lot of printing, as we know from Gutenberg, you need a lot of paper. So these are examples of books in Jeonju. And this is an example. This is a Korean national treasure, and it is the 3 baskets. This is a main canon of Buddhist scriptures, and it is the Korean version that was over 80,000 woodblocks carved by hand. Then during a Mongolian invasion, they were all burned, and then they did it all over again. And so they have discovered no errors in all of these woodblocks, and they were found in Haeinsa, this temple in the south part of Korea, and they immediately were like, we have to move this to climate-controlled museum quality, storage. And once they did that, they started to decay. And then they realized, oh, all those monks had figured out an architectural system to actually preserve them, and that's why they are in this way where you have airflow and you have dirt floors to absorb moisture, and they moved them all back. So, and then letterpress printing, or I should say metal movable type, we think of as something that Gutenberg first did, or at least that's what I learned. And actually almost 100 years prior, the Koreans were doing it. And the Chinese had already done clay movable type. The issue with the Chinese language is that really not amenable to movable type because there's such a huge, you would need a ridiculous font of type to get every single character. Korean is a little easier, but still, the reason that it took off in the Roman alphabet is because it's only so many letters. So, but this is the oldest still existing manuscript or book that's been printed with metal movable type in the world. It's Jikji is the short word for it. It's again a Buddhist canon of right living, and it lives in Paris at the National Library of France, and there's a lot of controversy as to why a Korean national treasure is in France, but there are a lot of scholars working on trying to connect Jikji with Gutenberg, and I personally don't really think there's a connection, but there at least is more attention now given to kind of the global nature of metal movable type. But these are examples of the way that Hanji was used in these folding screens. You would use Hanji as the hinging mechanism, and the sewing box is all made of paper, and then the fan is this beautiful artifact. If you ever go to the Library of Congress in DC in the maps division, it's a map of Jeollado, which is one of the provinces, and then this low table, because Koreans were a floor culture, and so this kind of furniture you'd sit at and have a snack or eat something. From head to toe, you'd have Hanji, so like a more royal headdress, this gilded over paper. And then the talchum mask, the mask is it's a mask dance form that's was done usually by lower classes in Korea as a way to be able to talk actually very politically about what was going on, and to even be able to kind of more safely mock the people in power. And there are different characters, and so lots of masks made out of paper, and then this hat storage box, which is all calligraphy practice paper that's then reused by being pasted over a frame. On your feet, you could wear Hanji shoes, and these were very popular to the point where the government was very angry and was trying to clamp down on the theft of books, because at this time you couldn't just go to the store and buy paper. You would steal books, steal documents, steal government edicts, birth certificates, slavery documents, anything you could find, because they were all the rage, and also because paper is a great insulator, so it keeps your feet warm. And then this is a wedding gown. In Korea, this is so elaborately stitched and embroidered. This is not for one person. This is to share in the whole community. Each time a woman gets married, she wears the same one. But you can see you need Hanji to cover the parts that get the most wear to protect it, and you would just change out the paper when you were done. And then you could also use paper to make armor. So these are drawings of armor. This is in bow and arrow days, not guns, but and even the quiver for the arrow, woven out of paper and lacquered. And then you can see below the map, so atlases and things like that. This is also in the maps division at the Library of Congress, really beautiful. It's all made out of recycled paper. You can see on the back side, it was used for something else. And then in homes, on the outsides and the insides, and you can see the wood lattice work. They're all covered with Hanji. The doors are covered with Hanji. The walls, the ceilings, the floor have a special kind of Hanji to go with their own flooring, the heating system that heats the floor, and so you have an oiled paper for the floor, and then for ritual use. And this is one of many different kind of ritual uses, but this is Buddha's birthday in Seoul, and so you can see thousands of paper lanterns. So the way that I was trying to bring it to the US, so these are just kind of to show the paper mulberry trees in Korea, and then the ones that were planted in Cleveland at the Morgan Conservatory and harvested every year. I have to say, unfortunately, they are suffering deeply from the spotted lanternfly and other kinds of issues, and so they're having to start over their batch. But so the process of steaming and stripping the shoots, you can see the process in Korea. This was a process in Cleveland that they do every November and invite the community to join them. There are these knives that you need to strip the bark, and so the one on the very right is the knife that I got from Korea, and then the prototype in the middle, and then the final version at the end. And there's then the bark scraping platforms at the top, covered in leather. We just used rubber. Now I know that you can just get away with just a 2x4, but in Korea, you're scraping by hand. On the right, you can see all the Americans working in Cleveland. The burning of this is pepper plants in Korea to make ash, and then on the right, at just getting ashes from my friend's wood-fired stove to make potash, cooking outside in Korea in the snow, and then cooking outside at the Morgan where they can wheel out their gas-powered stove, and then the process of picking all the bark. And this is something we always invite any kind of visitors. This is high school students learning to pick bark over a light box. In 1933, Dart Hunter, who was an Ohioan, he traveled the world to research papermaking and went to Korea when it was colonized by Japan. And so he took some pictures that are very, very precious now, because this was not a thing that people really deemed important enough to document. But you can see the beading process along with other processes, and then you can see myself with a student beading by hand. These are seeds for essentially what's hibiscus, and then from Korea, and then these are ones that we seeded at the Morgan. And then I find it easier just to use a synthetic version. I think there's always room, and it's important in the evolution of any craft, any tradition, to keep just using what you can get away with in the place you are. Essentially, at this point, we're talking about Hanji migrating to the U.S. So This is a synthetic version I use, and then my teacher, Shin Hyun-se, with the hibiscus roots and the ooze coming from those. And then this is the process of making the bamboo screens. And that is the hardest one to replicate because this is not a bamboo, or should not be bamboo country. It's so invasive here. But and then other kinds of plants you need, like burdock, which many people think of as a weed. The burrs are actually ideal for cleaning the screens, kind of like a natural scrubby. And then these are some of my teachers, and then the places that I've been setting up to make paper, to make Hanji in the U.S. The process of boarding paper in Korea in 1933, in Korea in 2008, again on that heated steam, that steel dryer, and then in Ohio where I like to set up just laminate. This is like laminate sheathing that you put up in like shower surrounds, and it's great for drying paper. So again, this is an image in Korea where the Japanese are teaching the Koreans to make paper in their method. And Dart Hunter at the time, even though he was really, really biased and saying the Japanese paper is the best paper, that he actually felt that it was sad that the Korean method was disappearing. And this is probably the first instance of kind of an educational system of paper making. But it was because the Japanese felt this was a more efficient way. You didn't have to make those 2 layers. But my goal was always to kind of grab the end of that tail of whatever was disappearing in terms of the very, very old system of making Hanji, to document as much as possible and share it so that if it does disappear in Korea, and it may, there are very few people who are practicing the method that was in the video. At least we have our version of it in America. So this is the picture below is actually, she is a Korean adoptee from France. And then in a kind of, like, let's share in the colonialism is in Michigan at PBI, teaching Americans how to make Hanji. So, and then I also teach Hanji retreats. So every year I will teach for a week from beginning to end. I start with the bark, and we scrape the bark, how to make Hanji for small groups of students. And often I've been very gratified to have a lot of students from the Korean diaspora join me, and it's a really, really meaningful way for them to connect with their own heritage, which I know firsthand because this has been my life's work. And I've always said that I will use Hanji until it's no longer interesting to me, but it continues to exhibit so many ways of just opening so many possibilities of things I can do. So some of that is in the art, and so this is a crown from the Unified Shilla period, where they were doing beautiful gold work, and they would have these pendants dangling, and there are these jade kamas, and no one has quite figured out what this meant, and we still don't really know. And is it about life? Is it supposed to look like a fetus? Is it supposed to, what is it? Whatever it is. And often in tombs you see them they've been stolen. It's kind of the easiest thing to pull off. But I tried to replicate that with just paper in this piece on the right, and it's all different types of paper, and even the dangling mechanism is just a piece of the bark that's twisted and used as thread. And I had seen later some artifacts from present-day Kazakhstan, and the museum tag was saying, and it was all like little rolled pieces of gold that were soldered to another plate of gold, and the tag said, we don't know what this is. And I really appreciated that they said that, because I believe so much that some things are meant to be a mystery, and that's great, and that's fine, and we don't have to know everything, and we can't know everything. But I wanted to replicate this kind of, this image of like something rolled onto a surface that is of itself. And first I was doing it on just plain sheets of paper, and then I realized that for some reason it needed to be in a garment. And I think I was doing it at the time because I was traveling so much on residencies, because I didn't have a studio of my own, and it was just a way that I felt like I'm just always packing, and you just have to like really think strategically about like what you can fit into a suitcase, and what is 50 pounds, and how do you get on the plane with this stuff. And so I started doing it, and right away figured out that like, it was the very beginning of understanding how difficult dressmaking is and that it is sculpture. So I always thought it was like you just cut out a T and make another T and then sew them together, not realizing your body actually has all these curves, and so I had to buy a pattern, and this was the first one I started with. And then after doing a lot of those, I realized, why don't I look at Korean garments and dresses? And of course, I have no training in any kind of sewing or dressmaking aside from home ec, or anything. It's really just like everything else. I look at artifacts and I'm very inspired by them. And so these are based on things I had seen of Korean dress. This is kind of the classical, like hanbok. And again, Hanji, Han means Korean, Ji means paper, so Hanji means Korean paper. So you don't have to say, you don't say Hanji paper, it's redundant. You would be, because if you said that, you'd be saying Korean paper, paper. Same with hanbok. Han means Korean, bok means clothing. Hanbok is just Korean clothing. And you can see I'm using a lot of scraps. A lot of this one involves persimmon dyeing, natural dyes, reclaimed paper. Just, I save everything. And I think part of it for me is that the only time I've ever gotten to wear a hanbok is when I was 1, and I was at the ceremony for when you turned 1, because in Korea infant mortality was so high, you didn't worry about having a celebration and with the baby until they lived long enough that you knew they would stay alive. And so at the ceremony, I think some of you might know, they put out little objects for you to grab, and that kind of tells the future of the. I picked a pencil, which meant I was going to be a very good scholar. But I haven't ever been able to wear one of these again. But just so you can see some of the steps, this is one kind of natural dye. I use many different ones. This is cochineal, and it is unfortunately not vegan. It is it's bugs. It's bugs that that live on cacti in present-day Mexico. This is why Spain started a war, because it wanted to control the supply of red. That's why I wanted to control Mexico, because at the time Europe had no good plants for red. So there are bugs that are dried up and they're sold, and then you grind them up. So I will either grind them by hand or in some kind of blender. And this is just the end of the bath. It's a little more complicated than just boiling them. And then I would dye the cords or the paper. So that's one piece of it. Then for the printmaking part, this is bark that I have cooked, and then instead of beaten into a pulp to make paper, I spread it to make what I call bark lace, and then I ink it up, and then I relief print it. And so I do that on different kinds of paper. This is like, with one piece of bark, I was just testing out 3 different types of paper. And you can see now that pink one that's cochineal dyed becomes the front panel of this dress that I start to try to figure out, like, oh, this skirt looks way too long. And then eventually I shortened it, and that's the piece you see in the show today. There are many other art forms that use Hanji, and this is one of them. It's called jisung, and it's paper basketry, basically. So most likely, people were binding books in Korea, and they had to trim them, and all those offcuts they were not going to throw away, because remember how precious paper is. They were stealing it for everything. So they probably figured out, oh, if I just kind of twist this strip of paper, it actually becomes very strong and acts like thread. And so this is my teacher, Na So-hwan, and he is the only person I know in Korea who does it this way, where he, instead of just twisting one thread at a time, one strip at a time, he takes 2 and makes one rope. So he's twisting in one motion and plying with the next. Twist, ply, twist, ply, twist, ply, twist, ply. You can see all of the cords he's making behind him. That napkin is there to catch the bits of dust that are falling off, or the hairy bits of fiber that are coming off. He was very, very fastidious. Later, he got mad at me for, you shouldn't take a video while I'm barefoot. But, and if you do know Korean, you can watch all the videos are on YouTube, where he like makes fun of me and says my cords are bad. But, so this is the process of making the chamber pot that's also in the show. So it's a double-walled vessel, starts at the bottom on the inside, comes up, and then comes on the back on the outside. This is now the layer coming down. And this, it's hard to I would say watch it and turn up the volume just for that part. The paper is squeaking because he's pulling so hard. His fingers would bleed because of this. Like this, it looks easy, but it's really, really hard on your hands. So this is the process of making the lid, and this is the process of turning all the cords around so that you can kind of shape it to make that lip of the lid. And then this is my papermaking teacher telling my cheesing teacher or something or another. He is the one who introduced me to my cheesing teacher. And then this is the first layer of waterproofing, which is sticky rice paste. And this is the last time you're able to kind of shape it, because if you have any deformities in the pot, while it's drying, and it takes like 24 hours, you have to kind of push it and prod it into shape. And then once it's dry, then you start layers of lacquer. And lacquer is its own craft that comes from the sap of the lacquer tree, and it has the same compound as poison ivy, so it can be very dangerous if you're allergic to it and it's in its viscous form. But once it sets, which is a form of polymerizing, then it's totally safe. It's food safe and waterproof, and it's ready to go. So that's the piece that's in the show, originally used for brides being taken to their new husbands. So in Santa Fe years ago, I saw this piece on the left that was just, I was told this was Korean paper. It was Hanji, and it was obviously like wine or water storage. And I just loved that it was so weird. It was such a weird shape, and that it was just completely collapsed. And I went back to Korea after the first Fulbright, and I asked my teacher, I said, I want to be able to make things that are like crooked. And he said, why would you want to do that? He did not believe me unless I could I had to show him this image. And then as soon as he saw that it was a real thing that existed, he's like, okay, let's go. So then we worked on making this piece that is also in the show, and it is, I did a first layer of walnut ink, wasn't happy with that, and so I did indigo over that, and then a little persimmon over that. And this is basically like old-fashioned water bottles, right? So gourds were the original, like before you had to make them, because they have a neck, so you can tie something around, so you could tie it to your belt and go on a journey. And I would see, after I learned how to make things asymmetrical, I would see it everywhere I went. So at the Cleveland Museum of Art, in the Korean galleries, they had the Celadon, where it's just slightly tipped over. So all the pieces the goal was before, right, is to be like very, like, do what your teachers say, be nice, and do everything straight up and down. And then over time, I was trying, the skill is actually really in being able to make things bend over and to move and gesture more. So this one on the right is also in the show. I also was interested in like mashups, and so this is a gourd. This one on the left, it's actually also a double-walled vessel. It's marbled. Marbling something 3D is very stressful because it's just one shot and it's over. You could ruin it, or so if you're lucky, you don't. But and then the one on the right, I had started it as a gourd and then remembered I had a show that needed ducks, so I turned it into a duck. But really, the ducks came first from seeing this image in a museum catalog from the 80s in La Jolla, the Craft Museum. And it was just so thrilling it was a 19th century paper duck from Korea. And I just was like, oh my God, look at how, it's just so endearing. But this was a paper version of the wedding ducks given to people who were getting married. So in the old days, you would actually bring a male-female geese. That would be more practical in agricultural times. Then the symbolism just took over, and you would give carved wooden ducks that were painted to look like mandarin ducks, because mandarins mate for life. So it's to promote marital fidelity and also fertility, because ducks have lots of babies. And so you give that to people getting married. And so this was my first attempt on the right. And my students, when I was making it at Penland, they said, Aimee, have you ever seen a duck? Because that's not what they look like. And then I tried to make another one, and then I finally went back to my teacher in Korea, and he happened to have this image, so this convinced him, and then this was the first one I made once I came back. And then the other thing he made me make was a teapot, which is also in the show. And I was very resistant. I said, no, I don't want to make it. And he said, no, you have to make it. And I said, no, I don't want to. And he said, no, you have to. And I said, no, I don't want to. And again, in the end, I have to be a good, nice, obedient student, right? So, okay, fine, I will make it. And and it was so hard. And there's a point at which it's coming down, because this is double walled as well. Right here is when you start to want to murder someone. And and this is why I don't make a lot of these. It's very, very, very difficult. But I understood once I made it why he wanted me to make it. It wasn't about making a teapot. It's about being able to make everything else. So once I could do that, I knew how to open the mouth of a duck. I knew how to sprout wings off of it. You could, once you can sprout a spout off of a pot, then you can sprout anything off of another body. So this is the piece that's in the museum show now that is, technically it is, the duckling is the lid and the mouth has a little hole, and there's a handle. If you it's so poorly engineered as a teapot, for any of you know how to do it, it would not work very well, but that's the idea. And in the spirit of these mashups, I also love to, this is only the second in a series, and this is in the show, of a book and a duck. So, and the story, there's a story behind this. You have to read the catalog to find out. But it kind of is like this story where I made this, and I knew that to counter, because it's all one piece, they're connected, to counterbalance, the chamber pot, I had to put a weight in the duck, and they're always hollow. So I put a glass egg in there. And then the reason I did this was really bad, which is I saw a jury looking at my work and saying really not very enlightened things about it. And so I reacted to them rather than responding or not listening to them at all. And so this is the dye bath I made. I grow various plants for dyes and paper makings. This is Coreopsis. And then I decided, this is not working. This is not working. So let's just separate them. And remember, they were white. So that dye bath was to dye this, and then to dye this. And then this became the housing for this book. So this book and this duck are all in the show. Now that they're divorced, this is my pregnant duck. This is my pregnant divorced duck. I just took the divorced out of the title because we have such a bad feeling towards divorce. But I think in this case it worked out well. So for any of you who ever get to handle it, this is the only piece I have that has something in it. And then, of course, that mashup with the books. And this was a book that I wrote about baskets, and so there was a basket attached to it. And then I did another version. This is actually the second version. The first version doesn't have a basket attached to it. And the second version, the book is in the basket, and so those two are in the show. I also wanted to use that chiseling process for the actual cover of the book so that the whole cover and the pages become that they're all paper. The whole book is paper. This is a small early edition of 4 that I made right after I got back from Korea, and it's all about a kiseng, which is a Korean courtesan, a very famous one, and kind of her poetry. And then going into kind of textiles, and this is a very old artist book I made that is in Oberlin's collection, and it's from an old sari. And I just always, from the moment I started making books, I love to just cut up clothing and make books. But it really connects to this, again, this obsession with paper as textile. This piece in the show is all paper that's been spun into thread and then woven. And then the whole content of the book is about how we kind of continue on and go forward, and how we live our lives by just doing these things to kind of keep ourselves, in the very smallest ways, keep ourselves together. But again, as you multiply that stitch, it becomes an entire network. And in that, there is a lot of power. So this is a combination of textile. The outer part is like old pants, the cover, and then the inner part is all knitted paper. And this is all recycled from a piece of clothing I had knitted very early when I was knitting paper and figuring out I was not meant to knit clothing, but I was actually meant to knit books. And so I really love the way that a knitted page has so many gaps and these empty spaces that become places for meaning to arise and to disappear, and that a lot of that comes from my own experience of being kind of overly seen and completely unseen. So these are examples of some of the early knitted books. And they were done, I did all of them as one of a kind, but they became so impossible to keep in inventory that I finally, last year, I had a wonderful residency at Kalamazoo Book Art Center and funded by the NEA, and was able to start, I did the letterpress printing for this book that I decided to edition. And of course, because Cynthia gets first look, she has this first one. The other ones so far are at Stanford, Oxford, Western Michigan, and University of Michigan. I can't make them fast enough. So, but this is all about the beauties of perimenopause, and which is what I'm in, and this forgetting, like just this brain fog life, and so it's all about that, and I find that this structure works so well for this kind of thing where things are slipping all the time out of so many holes, and so. And then you can see some of the knitted, a little bit of that knitted sample here. This is a book that's also in the collection that it's one of my favorite books. This is one of the best books I've ever made, and I don't know if I'll make a better one, but Peculiar and Commonplace, and it is going through 15 years of reading. Whenever I read, I take notes from books that inspire me, and that's basically what Commonplaces were, and where you just keep track of things that you've read, and I just tried to gather them in, and there's 3 different narratives going on. One which is a fake sewing, like dressmaking manual. One which is all these quotes that are going on, and then the other is a story that I'm telling through these different stories about all people from Ohio, about how we all think that we are somehow different or alone or outcast, but even like the people that we think would be the most like this is my world. I am a blonde, blue-eyed white man, and even this person is having a hard time. So realizing that we've been tricked into thinking that we are kind of like all in this position when actually we all feel this way. So, and then at the end, there's this, remember, it's a fake dressmaking manual. So of course there's a dress in there. And so there's another book in the show that Yuka Petz did a beautiful video about in Artist Books Unshelved, and that also has that, and for a different reason. There's a different reason that the dress is in there. But so in terms of structure, I really love books that lay flat, and so this book covered about this like obsession I have with like covering everything in my home with like fabric, which I didn't notice until someone came over and was like, what is going on? But this is a double needle, it's bridling. It's not exactly a Coptic, and I just love it because of this way it lays flat. And so for this next book, Steady, I was using this beautiful structure that Claire Van Vliet and Janus Press, that they developed all these beautiful bindings that were specifically for artist books, and they shared them with us in this wonderful book, Woven in Interlocking Structures. And I just love the way that it really highlights handmade paper, which was the whole point of this when they developed this binding for them. Is called Bone Songs. And then we'll come back to the imagery later, but then it talks, there's a lot of weaving that goes on, and this is one of the books in the collection. And in the show, and what you cannot see is underneath that woven piece in each of these, this is part of a sample book series, there is actually a poem. There's a poem that goes all the way throughout about language, Korea, my aunt going through dementia, the slippage of words and language and memory, but all disguised as like this, as just a sample book, right? A sampler being very good, very dutiful, keeping track of everything. This is another one in the show where there are woven pages that you find throughout. And then this honeycomb structure that I loved making, that I would try to kind of put everywhere that I could get away with, and it's in, I think, at least 3 of the books in this show. And it's a structure that I kept making, and then COVID happened, and I just was like, this is so unimportant, and I just didn't touch it for years. And when I finally got back to it, I made a series of these, and these were all leaves that were, or painted paper, obviously, that I glued in, and I made 4 of these, and I was so excited about this series. And so later I was so grateful that Cynthia took 2 of them, because the rest of this, I made a whole batch of books, and they were almost all one of a kind, at least 11 of them. And then I mailed them to my dealer and in Birmingham, and they made it to the Birmingham Central USPS station and then disappeared. So thank God there are 2 that still exist, and they're both in the show. But about, if again, is the sum of the parts greater, and just talking through plants, talking about plants, and relating them to us as humans, because in the end we are all these organisms. And so this is a mix of language, the Korean language, and where I'm just trying to remember the alphabet in Korean, because it's so hard these days with everything digital. I end up, you just look up the word, you don't have to find it in the dictionary, you don't have to know what the order of the alphabet is. And so here I'm just practicing the order on top of dyed Hanji that's also been overprinted with bark lace. And then the honeycomb appears again. And then in other places you see the bark lace again. And this was a piece I did where I was trying to find all the native names for this, because we call it bark cloth, we call it bark anything, but those are not the things that wasn't the name for them in those native languages. And a lot of those have disappeared. So this was an attempt to kind of revive those, whether it's kappa or tapa, and many other options all around, especially what we think of as the third world or the global south. And so that is kind of the main topic of this sample book. That's the big book that's not in the case, it's in the show. And this is where I thought I wanted to talk about the bark and the way that it prints, but also talk about why does a book, like this is a book, even though it's not bound, and how a sample book is really not that useful if you can't like lift up the whole thing and examine it from all different perspectives. So just a little bit, this is, you can see some of the process of making that bone song structure by Janus Press. And this is where I was at Oak Spring Garden Foundation in Virginia, and on this wonderful residency where I always make so many books, and I was finally figuring out how to do this without looking at the manual, right? That's like always the next step, being able to do it without instructions, so that's embodied in your being. And so again, lay flat, but now without even thread. I don't need a needle, I don't need thread, I just need paper. So these are just paper straps that are woven through. And so this is one of the books, the first ones that came out that went into Cynthia's collection, that was during COVID. And I was so scared to go outside, not just because we didn't know how it spread, but because my next door neighbor said something to me that made me realize immediately that he thought that I was a nexus of disease, and that anytime I left town, I was going to Asia. And I just thought, it's not even safe. It's just not safe to go outside, but I could stay inside and look outside. Right outside my front window, I had a rhododendron bush that, this was my first house. I didn't plant that thing. I didn't know anything about it. And I had read a wonderful book by Hannah Hinchman, A Trail Through Leaves, about journaling by drawing, and journaling by looking, and then journaling by writing into your drawings. And I would just every day draw that bush. And so that was kind of the idea behind this book. But alongside the book, I was keeping my sketchbook, right? So there's a sad-looking bush in the, right? That's as far as, and then I would just draw it every day. And when you do that, you realize, oh, when it's cold, it does this. When it's sunny, it does that. When it's raining, it does this. When it's snowing, it does that. And you think that this like very unassuming bush that I did not care about suddenly became this like very important friend. And I would record the date and the time, and I would do this over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and then eventually started putting them together into these books. So I also wanted to share the way, like there is a lot of recycling that I do in my work, but there's a lot of transformation I do in my teaching. And so at Oberlin, and this 2013, my colleague, special collections librarian Ed Vermew, found this changing room connected to a gang shower. And he said, hey, could we ask the custodians to move all their stuff out and we could maybe use it? and we transformed it into a papermaking studio. And so every January I teach students from bark to the sheet, from rags to the sheet, how to make paper, and then we take it all to the library and I make them make books out of it so they can do the whole thing. Recently we were able to get a beater, and then last year was the first time I started teaching my Hanji retreat out of that studio. And so I was going to say you should join me in June, but it's already full, and the second section already just filled up. But I try to do it every year. And the last thing I wanted to share is this book is, I think of as one of everything I do in terms of, I did the Hanji research, and right away I saw there was a screen maker who was the last screen maker with his wife and his employee back in 2009. And I was like, is anyone concerned? There's only them doing it, and no one's concerned. Eventually, when I go back in 2014, the employee's gone, they've moved, it's just him and his wife. And again, does anyone care about learning? I would try to send my students, they wouldn't teach them. And then finally, that's why I got the second Fulbright in 2021 to go and try to learn from him. And even then, by then he was very kind of far gone into dementia. She was doing most of the work, and she showed me for an hour the different steps and was like, okay, that's it, just practice now for 5 years. And I was like, that's not really what I was looking for, but that's why I went to the national treasure of the bamboo blind making, and we negotiated a way for me to travel, hike into the mountains and cut down bamboo. And but I realized really quickly, I'm too old for this. I thought this was going to be my retirement gig after papermaking was no longer viable, and I realized this is really for a younger person, and I'm still looking for that younger person. But in the meantime of being very concerned about Hanji tools, I saw it's not just Korean paper, it's papermaking everywhere. This is a big problem. All of our tool makers for European-style paper making, for molds and decals, for beaters, for even hand tools, they are all getting older, retiring, and dying. And so I, through several sources of funding, for I think 9 years was researching, was traveling to New Zealand, to Europe, all over the U.S., and unfortunately, in the process of writing it, 3 of my subjects died. I mean, I was just so heartbroken, especially because one of them was one of our younger ones. He was 49. It was a very sudden death. And then after it came out, another one of them died. And I just think of it as like the whole point of this show is so that you can see the context. Like there's this incredible book collection, but it comes out of something bigger. I mean, the books have always been for me like the central thing that I do ever since I was like 20, 21. But out of that came the paper, and out of that came the Hanji, and out of that came the chisung, and out of that came the garments, and then all alongside that is all the tool research. And I just I don't understand why people don't all see it this way, like that it's an ecosystem. It's not just we have to save the paper making technique or the paper makers. It's the tool makers, it's the agriculture, it's the government policies that protect or do not protect them. And so I think of the scholarship, the writing as one piece. I have self-published pieces about milkweed papermaking, about chisung. The teaching is a one piece, and for me, the direct transmission is really important. I have been very resistant to kind of Zoom teaching and that kind of thing. And if anyone thinks that that's really easy to do, we can talk. But I think that when you are with a person and they push on your thumb, and then you can feel how much pressure you have to put down to make a good basket. I think we could do Zoom all day and you would never know. So that direct transmission is why I keep doing these Hanji retreats and keep doing the research and hoping that more of my students do that. And so I'm very, very excited that this fall, Penland is going to host myself and some of my former students for first ever Hanji Summit, which is part of a BIPOC residency where we will be fully funded to travel there. We will go home with big checks to take care of the fact that we've been away from home for 2 weeks, but share a papermaking studio, make Hanji together, dream about ways we can continue kind of establishing the American branch of Hanji here. And also we will have the apprentice of my teacher, Shin Hyun-se, travel from Korea to join us, which will be the first time we've ever had a young Korean papermaker work with American papermakers. So everything is always going more slowly than I'd like, but it's going, right? So this has been really long. Thank you. If you have any questions, let me know.
Hi. It's kind of silly, but I was wondering, you talked about the paper making process being cold and wet, and I was wondering what it smells like.
It smells, it depends on how long you've let things sit around. So it shouldn't really smell that much, especially if you're doing it in the winter. That would like really reduce smells, right? The reason we eat food when it's hot is that's when it volatilizes and we can smell it and taste it. But it should smell, well, there's a very distinctive smell to the alkali, and some people come in, they're like, it smells like hay, it smells like a farm, and some people, very few people are allergic to it, and then that's really bad for them to smell. But smells like plants, it smells like harvest. Sometimes can smell like food almost. Like sometimes when I know it's different from Hanji, when I work with milkweed seeds and the coma, and I get lazy and I don't want to separate them, and I just throw it all into the beater, and I don't cook it because actually that fluff is pretty much pure cellulose, so you don't really need to cook it. And then when I make the paper, it smells like corn because I forget. The seed it's everything for the plant, all the nutrients you need. So it's just very oily, and but yeah, it really depends. If you start to leave it for a while, that's when it starts to smell like cheese and feet, and that's what you would like to avoid, because once that paper re-enters kind of a moist environment, then the smell starts to come back. Though we've done tests where we kind of bury the books and paper in like silica gel to try to absorb it, and it helps take away some of the smell.
I really enjoyed your presentation. And my granddaughter went to Oberlin and minored in art. And I'm just curious, when you were there, what years you were there teaching?
Oh.
That maybe she took a class from you.
Yeah. I teach very few students a year because it's just in the winter term in January. So I teach 8 students a year because that space, if you notice, is very small. So I've been teaching there since 2014. Yeah. And I've had some amazing students come through, and Erin knows them as well. There was a student, SR, and they were just desperate to make paper. This is the only time ever that I allowed a student to come in over the weekend, because it's a Monday through Friday class, and let them work unsupervised because I trusted them. And then I came back and I was like, oh my God, you used almost all the pulp. And I had to pull them aside and say, listen, this is not the last time you're gonna make paper. And to just try to okay, chill out. And it's true, they went on to get every single fellowship, internship, scholarship, job, went on to get an MFA in sculpture at Yale, has done all of the prestigious fellowships in hand paper making since then, and but has expanded their practice to do so much more. So, and I have many others that have gone into kind of different fields, and that's really, it's very gratifying. Yeah, I wish I could do it for more people, but again, I really, really so believe in this kind of, maybe it's coming in from a Neo-Confucian training, this very deep investment that I have in my students, that I don't just see you for a weekend, bye, but that I really spend a lot of time with you, and then we continue a relationship, and I do a lot of coaching, professional as well, where I will yell at them and say, you asked me to talk to you, and we were on the phone for an hour, and then you never followed up to say thank you. And you need to send thank you emails. How hard is that? Do you know what I had to do when I was a kid? And write thank you cards and put them in the mail? Do you know what a stamp is? And for the ones who really get it, they understand, and now they bring me lots of presents and gifts, and which is a very Korean method. But I do think, I always say to them, I really just, I want to invest in exceptional people, and exceptional people acknowledge and are grateful to other people. And so if that's something that you didn't learn growing up, then I will teach you now. And if you don't continue, I don't want to see you again. So
Well, thank you. Maybe I'll have to ask her if she
yes.
heard of you.
Or you can tell me separately what her name is.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for your talk. My name's Priska, and I'm Korean American, and I love going to Hanji every time I go to Seoul. But I do notice, as you said, most of the folks who own those shops are elderly. And I was just curious your thoughts about, you expressed that a lot of the folks who show interest in your retreats are from the Korean diaspora. And now that South Korea has evolved a lot, especially in the last 10 to 20 years economically, and there's a lot more younger people who have access to education outside of Korea, and there's just a lot more cultural exchange than there used to be. And so I was curious what your thoughts are about the current younger generation of Korean artists in Korea, and their interest in preserving historical craft and sharing exchange, because I know even myself, amongst many of my friends, they come to the U.S. or we're study abroad students. And so just what you shared about the continuing to look for an apprentice who wants to seek out
Right.
preservation.
Thank you, Krista. I think it's really, I can't speak at all for young Korean artists because I don't interact with a lot of them. Most of the people that I meet are Korean diaspora who are, and some of them are artists and some of them are going into conservation, or I think it's tricky. Something that I didn't really go over is that in Korea, and I think it's still kind of like this now, maybe less with the younger generation, Korean paper making is a low class job and activity. It's not ever something that anyone would aspire to do. Artists in Korea often come from wealthy families, and so this is seen as like labor that it's similar to like undertaking, to butchering, to so this is historically done by prisoners, farmers, monks, peasants. These are all people that were not very highly regarded, and were just seen as laborers. So when I was in Korea doing the initial research, and granted that's been almost 20 years now, the artists that I met, and these are mature artists, they would be very proud of, oh, I have a Hanji maker, and then I tell them what I want, and then they make me the Hanji that I need to make my art, or I get my my mulberry pulp from them. But they do the work. I'm not that interested in doing it myself, because it's kind of regarded as two separate things. So I don't know if that is the same. And really, when you go, if you get the chance to go to a Korean paper mill, it's not glamorous at all. It's kind of gross. My last teacher, he lived in a room in his paper mill, which was very kind of, that's not standard, but he's just so dedicated to it. His wife's not crazy about that because they have a proper house elsewhere, but he just wants to be there during the week, just making paper all the time. He would wear the same clothes every day, like just holes in everything, like the belt loops are falling apart, same worn belt, and then like the next week he would wear one outfit the rest of the week. The bathroom is also, there was a toilet, there was just like a faucet coming out of the wall. There's no sink, there's just like one day there's a basin of clothes, and the next day there's a basin of raw meat. And the toilet looks like it's never been cleaned before. But that's also because, if you think of the culture that it came from, like you don't clean an outhouse, like we don't have to clean this. And so like the apprentice that I would go in with to work every day, he never used that bathroom. It was only me that used it because I have to use the bathroom a lot and I don't know where else to go. But any visitors, they would never use that bathroom. And so that is not a life that young Korean people have any interest in having. That might be like interesting to see, but they don't actually want to live that way because it's very hard. Essentially, you're having the life again of a laborer. It's labor, it's farming, it's agriculture, it's women in their 80s and 90s just sitting in the back room with like fluorescent lights over them with their hands in water, just picking bark off of bark all day. And there aren't, young people don't want to do that. And so I read something just today. Paul Denhode, who is a Canadian living in Japan, he's been there for decades, and he's also a paper maker. And he said there's something about the beauty of, like, we see these videos of people like laboring to dye huge swaths of fabric or make silk blankets or everything, and it's very romantic and it leaves out all of the labor. But he said that the issue is, he's like, I know that labor, and yet this video is also very beautiful and it really is moving. And so it is because of the labor that we are so attracted to it. But it is very hard to find, I think, like the Korean diaspora students I have, they really, they see what I've done as an example, but it's hard to do all of it. And so I understand if you want to focus on the artwork and be an artist and not worry about making the paper. I understand if you want to make the artwork and you don't want to do the research or the scholarship. But because even like me, myself, my body has been really affected by the process. Like, I have to get a total hip replacement soon. I'm 48, and I'm like, what is wrong with my family doesn't do this. And the doctor said, what does your family do for a living? And, my sister's a film editor, so she sits on her butt every day. And I mean, my mom was a nurse. But still, there's something about the labor that it is also a sacrifice. And I've been told by an American paper maker, Amanda Degner, and anyone who tells you can make paper for the rest of your life is lying to you. And I've seen a lot of paper makers like that, their bodies, they tell them and that's why I tried to make screens as my retirement thing, but that, I don't know what the answer is. I do think that there's more interest, but I worry there's so many more distractions. Like, it's hard. How did I get the time to do this? 'Cause I got a Fulbright grant. I got paid. I got paid to go there, and that's just all I had to do. And it was at a time when I was still young and unattached enough that I didn't have a house that I had to have someone watch. I didn't have a car that someone had to drive while I was away. I could just go and be there and like not worry about anything else. And I think that those opportunities are very limited, and our culture is set up in a way that it's just, we're so easily distracted, it's hard to focus on any one thing. I don't think I'm answering your question, but.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for coming. I'll be sending you a thank you. So my question is, given what you've just said about the low-class nature of papermaking in Korea, what do those people think of you who are taking up the craft?
Well, a lot of them didn't think very highly of me, which is why they didn't let me study with them. The initial response was just like, what? Oh, what? What? You are not even married. Don't you need to go get married? What are you doing out here in the countryside? It was also a lot of, you don't look like you can handle this physically. So we're not even going to bother with this. I think even my first teacher, when we first started working together, and he only kind of took me on because I told him about all the places I'd gone that had rejected me. And then he was like, oh, I guess this person is serious if she did all that. He said, I don't know why I'm even teaching you all of this. Like, how am I supposed to make my living if I tell you everything? And I think part of it is that there was this mix of that they feel a kind of kinship, like, oh, someone is actually really excited and engaged and is asking all these questions, and suddenly I feel like my work is meaningful and is important to someone else, and it's not just me continuing this family legacy, because what else am I going to do? And so there's part of it is like they had that feeling, but I also feel like, and this is the same for not just my Korean Hanji teachers, but just everyone, that it's very I feel like it was very easy to underestimate me, just be like, this is weird, but oh, well, it's just for this time, and we'll just humor her for now. And he had no idea what I was going to do. Even though I said, I'm trying to do this research, and this is a way to uplift you. I want to tell people I want people to buy your paper. And then my second Hanji teacher, by then I had such a body of work and teaching and images that I could go with my laptop and be like, look, something like, this is what I was doing then. And also when I built the vat here, and he could see like, oh, this person is very serious. And it made him, and he says this in the catalog, it made him want to teach me everything he knew. And he was the first person to say, if you have a question, just ask me and I will answer you. Whereas a lot of other people, their MO is, you need to earn this. Like I would ask, there was a Buddhist nun I went to early on in my Fulbright, and I asked her, oh, how did you dye this? And she was like, maybe someday if you come and work for me and prove yourself to me, I will tell you. And there was also this sense that, well, you're American, so is this good for me if I tell you all this stuff and then, or teach you, like you're not gonna stay here and help me, you're just gonna go away, which was the idea that Buddhist nun had about a prior American who went to study with her, where she learned everything she could. She didn't speak Korean, but she could tell that this nun was withholding some information. And she was like, she's not showing me the heart of Hanji making. I know it. And when she kind of confronted her, she was like, why would I show you that? You're leaving. Like, if you were gonna stay, and there was this whole gossip that I've heard from both sides that if you prove to me you're going to stay by marrying a Korean man, I will show you the heart of Hanji making. And then there was all this stuff about, did she find a man? Sounds like the man couldn't handle it and didn't stick around. But yeah, I think it's a mix. I think there's a lot of tension actually with some of my other teachers, and then I don't talk to some of them because they had expectations like, it's your job now you need to get me to America, and you need to get me on a first-class ticket, and you need to get me a solo show with the Whitney, and then you need to get me a book published in Korean about Hanji, then you need to translate it into English and have it published by a very, popular publisher, and I just couldn't do it. And I had to really disappoint them or cut off contact, but there was a lot of weird expectations that I think again comes from that Neo-Confucianism, this you are now my servant, or you are, like anything you do is my property, and you are here to take care of me. And that was, for me as an American, very hard. So I think it really depends on the teacher. I had my natural dyeing teacher who, his studio is the one that made this, and they designed and dyed it. He understood completely because he was part of the resistance movement. He loved my great uncle. When he found out that Kim Dae-jung, that I was related to him, he was just like, oh my God. And that I went to Oberlin, he was like, oh, you're a lefty. And he was just so excited. And he understood what it meant he went to law school, but because of the student protests had to escape into the mountains because they would have killed him. They were doing terrible things to these students. And because then he couldn't get his degree, he couldn't get a real job. But in the mountains, he had met this older woman who taught him how to do natural dyeing. And then he came back to the city, and all he was able to do was try to publish books or open a gallery, and eventually with his wife open a natural dyeing studio. And that probably was not really that's not really what he wanted to do, but it was the only opportunity available to him. So people like him, he was more than happy to share with me, and he actually knew what Fulbright meant. So it's a whole range. It's a big range.
We have one last question back here.
Thank you for the presentation. I have done a little bit of studying in the classical Korean poets and so on, Yoon Sun-do and so on, and I'm wondering, when I look at the pictures of his manuscripts, it looks like they're done on bamboo, and so I'm curious about when papermaking actually arrived as a medium for communicating any kind of writing, but was it really used by the poets, or were they still back and using other kinds of
I
methods?
think it probably depends on when and where and what kind of resources. If we think about Chinese paper making, the oldest piece of paper we have that's still from China is like about 250 BCE. The time that it was officially codified was 106 CE, and so that was in China, and then of course had a lot of contact with Korea. So we're looking at somewhere between the 3rd and the 7th century in Korea that paper making is really developing there, because they would be seeing these manuscripts and things coming in from China, and the whole reason that Asian paper making is using these plants and this style of paper making and the kind of quality of the product is because it was to emulate silk, which is what they would have been writing and painting on prior to paper. So it definitely was developed for writing and for art, for two-dimensional, for ink, for brush and ink. That's really, those are kind of the scholars, the big tools, like the ink, the inkstone, the brush, the paper, and I forget the other thing. It's, it's like maybe it's the ink, the inkstone, the brush, and the paper. That's 4, yeah. So I think it really would, again, depend on the resources of any one person. I think all that kind of writing onto leaves, onto slips of plants, that probably was happening concurrent to when paper was coming in. So it really depends on, again, where and when. Like I said, the resources, like you couldn't just go and get paper. This was like the government had the power to, they would have their own paper makers. They had a whole paper making department. Or again, the temples where the monks were. And that was a method by which the government at a certain time, once it was switching from Buddhism, away from Buddhism, that they would persecute the monks by saying, your tax this year is to make 1 million sheets of paper, which was not possible. And then at that point, they would spend so much time making paper that they couldn't actually worship, and that was intentional. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. But yeah, I don't have exact dates for that, but I would think it would be all, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Aimee and Erin.